a conversation about a quote by Epicurus, which was a Greek Stoic philosopher. And this quote basically said that you should always remember what a thing is. And what he meant by that is that all material things are perishable. And so if you even look at your wife or your kid, which you love very dearly, then you should always remind yourself that they are human beings, and as such, they will have to die someday. And if you always keep that in mind, then you will not be perturbed or upset when it actually happens one day, when they die. And so there is this very great book that I'm reading at the moment, or that I have just finished reading. And Toynbee talks about Epicurus and about the Stoic philosophy of detachment, which is one of, I think, the 4 ways that he describes how individuals can try to cope with a disintegrating society. And the Stoics try to cope with the disintegration of their society by detaching themselves from all material things, by being completely not perturbed if something falls apart, because that's just the nature of things, that everything falls apart. And Toynbee criticizes this view and says that it's basically unhuman and that it cannot therefore last for a long time because it lacks the quality of love. And that's his main critique of the Stoic philosophy, or of detachment in general. And so we thought we could, because it would be interesting to compare the Stoic philosophy to Christianity and see what the differences and what the similarities are. So maybe you could just give us your first thoughts on that, Christoffer.
Yes, thank you very much, Amos. Right, so when you formulated that message from that philosopher, which we discussed last time, when you formulated it this way today, I really saw the Stoic implications and philosophy behind that quote. So we really see the Stoicism present there. And yes, I think we realized there is a significant difference between the Stoic philosophy and the Christian philosophy when it comes to the relevance and role of emotions, and also, of course, love. When it comes to emotions, we realize that we human beings are by nature emotional creatures. We feel, we can feel pain, we can feel joy, we can feel many sorts of emotions. And we see that emotions play a significant role in our lives. And the Stoics, like the philosopher behind that quote, would say that, well, when you realize the truth about the perishability of material goods, then it seems that the emotions would sort of be weakened or ignored, perhaps. I'm not quite sure if the philosopher would say it exactly that way, but it seems that he emphasizes this truth at the expense of emotions, to put it that way. But when we see how human nature works, and also in our own lives, we see that emotions are very deeply connected to tragedies that we face, even though we are aware that they are inevitable. Whenever we have a relative who is very old and then passes away, we are fully aware that the person was going to pass away one day, because that's how human beings are in this current situation, that when we grow old, eventually we will die. But still, we feel a sorrow, we feel grief, especially if that relative was very close to us. And that seems to be inevitable, and that seems to be something we have, even though we know the truth that the philosopher is pointing out in the quote. And it touches upon the question of whether emotions can be good or bad, and if so, to what extent. And I would argue, as Christianity also would affirm, that emotions in themselves is a good thing. that sometimes it is not problematic to use emotions. You can feel happiness, you can feel joy, and you can also sometimes feel anger. Now, what Christianity would also say, as Aristotle also would say, you need to keep those emotions in moderation. The emotions are to be subject to reason, so the emotions cannot be irrational. But sometimes emotions can be in accordance with reason, and therefore it can be good. Fear, for instance, is a good thing. If there is really a danger that faces you, then fear can be very useful. But there is also an irrational fear, which where you are afraid of something you have no reason to be afraid of. So to put it very briefly then, contrary to Stoicism, from a Christian point of view, we would say that it's human nature to have emotions. That's inherent to us, and emotions in themselves are a good thing, but we need to keep them in balance with reason.
Yes, I was thinking as you said this, that that human beings are by nature creatures that experience emotions, and that the Stoics in some sense say that if you understand the truth, then this will help you overcome the emotions. I think I had a couple of thoughts. One thought is that if you had absolutely no emotion, then you would have no drive or motivation to do anything. You would just be completely indifferent about what happens with you or around you, and you would just basically remain where you are until you die, because why should you do anything? There is no no impulse to do something without an emotion, without desiring something to be or desiring some other thing not to be. And so I think that's why trying to shut down the emotions completely is kind of an unhuman project. That's not the greatest word, but it's kind of it goes against the very nature of what it means to be a human. So yeah, maybe let's just start with that.
Yes, I agree with you there. That's a good point. It seems that all human action involves at least desire for some end or goal. Now I'm reminded of Ludwig von Mises, that famous economist, talking about how all human action is purposeful behavior, that we desire some end and we try to use means to reach that end. Whether we actually reach that end or not, that's another question, of course, but nevertheless, we have that pursuit. And so this desire is inherent in all motivation for doing anything at all. Now, perhaps some people would say, well, okay, yes, true, we have this general desire, but can that be called an emotion? And that could sort of, that touches upon the question of how do we define emotions? And there I don't have a clear definition yet. That's something I have to think about. But perhaps if I were to think about a definition right now, I would say something like a bodily sensitivity to certain realizations or experiences of something that happened to you, that the body has some sensitivity to it and reacts thus. So it seems like emotions is a bodily thing and a bodily sensitivity. But I'm not quite sure whether that's a fitting definition or not. But at least if we include desire in the category of emotions, then it seems impossible to get rid of it, because anything you do at all requires desire. And also when we talk about love, which you refer to, it seems that emotions are intimately connected with love, that whenever we love something, that will imply that there are emotions that could be released if there is something that happens to the object of our love. Let's say we love our parents, and then something happens to the parents. Let's say they pass away at an old age. Then we will have grief over that, and that grief seems to be connected to us loving them. So that seems to be a phenomenon about human nature as well. I'm not quite sure about the ontological relationship between love and emotion. As I've argued before, I would say that love is something deeper than mere emotion, but nevertheless, it seems that emotions are connected to love, and since love is a good thing, then it seems that emotions that are connected to love have some good basis if they are used in accordance with temperance and wisdom. So what do you think about this?
Yes, first, I think it's a good idea to try to define what an emotion is, because this will avoid confusion. And so I think perhaps the word you were searching for is sensation, or at least that's what came to my mind, that an emotion is a kind of bodily sensation, something that you feel somehow in your body in reaction to some cause. And this cause might, most often it's probably external, but it might also be internal. Like if you have, I don't know, if you feel nauseous because something in your stomach happened, or if you remember something and therefore feel sad or feel melancholic or whatever. But of course, also if something outside of you happens in your surrounding, then you might experience fear or joy or all the other emotions. So that's, I think, how I would define it. And also, I just wanted to make a point about the Stoics, because whenever I listen to, for example, the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I don't get the impression that the Stoics want to kind of shut down all emotions. Because, for example, Marcus Aurelius would say that if something good happens to you, then be glad and enjoy it. But they always stress that you should not be perturbed by emotions. You shouldn't be moved out of your state of inner tranquility. So it's like, if something good happens, then you enjoy it, but you don't get kind of overly excited. And then if the good thing goes away again, then you are not sad or upset by that, because you know that all good things go away anyways. So, and I'm not quite sure yet if there is some contradiction in that, between wanting to allow the good emotions but wanting to not allow the bad emotions. It intuitively, I feel like there might be some contradiction hidden in there. And concerning love, just very briefly, I think we have defined in earlier conversations, we have defined love as wanting the good for someone else or for something, but most often for someone. And in that sense, if you want the good for someone else, then you would feel positive emotions if you had some cause to believe that something good is actually happening or is about to happen to someone. And similarly, you would feel negative emotions if you had cause to believe that something bad is going to happen to this person that you love.
Yes, these are good points that you bring up, and yes, to your definition that it is a bodily sensation. I think that really touches upon what emotion truly is. Though at the same time, sensation, according to my impression, could be also merely to feel anything in the sense of simply touching something. Let's say now I touch my finger upon this wall, then I feel the wall touching my finger. But it wouldn't be called an emotion exactly. It would just be called feeling something, to be present in a very physical, concrete way. So perhaps it should be specified a little bit more to have a completely perfect definition. But yes, it's a bodily thing that the body reacts to, that you experience intimately within yourself. That's also a way we could put it when it comes to emotions. Yes, when it comes to the question of you could say promoting the good emotions of good things happening to you, but avoiding very bad emotions over bad things, like Marcus Aurelius, as you quoted him or referred to him. Yes, that's a good question, whether that is actually possible. It might seem like a contradiction. So I'm not sure, perhaps he would say that we can sort of change our emotional situation by reason, that we can train ourselves to change how we react to certain things. Like when something bad happens to us, then we meditate or concentrate on the perishability of those bad things, or we try to think consoling thoughts in that scenario. While when we're having good emotions, we think that now I'll just enjoy them. So our mind will react differently depending on what kind of emotions we have. And that's a very interesting question, whether that is actually something we can achieve, and how that works. That's an interesting subject indeed. And also to touch upon Christianity as well. There, when it comes to the question of tranquility or peace, in Christianity, it would be said and affirmed that if you have a love of God, love of Jesus Christ, then you have peace within your soul. So even though you can experience suffering and hardship, still you would have this inner peace that will be comforting in a very deep sense all the time, even though you will experience certain emotions that are I'm not sure if we could call it bothersome, but at least you will experience them as bad. But still, you will have this deep peace, which we also have talked somewhat about in earlier conversations as well. This deep joy that you have within yourself that is deeper than mere emotion. So that's an ideal in Christianity, though it would be different from the Stoics in the sense that this peace would not be completely devoid of any connection to emotions whatsoever. Emotions would be a part of human nature, and it would be something that you have and that you cannot completely extinguish, but it can be, you could say, brought to a good place within yourself if it is in a hierarchy with reason, and you have this inner joy or peace at the bottom of your soul, to put it that way. So that's how Christianity would understand this relationship, to put it that way.
Yes, that's an interesting point that you brought up here. I will like to pursue that more. Just very briefly, I think that your view is probably right, that what the Stoics or what these people try to do who want to have good emotions but not bad emotions is to kind of program like a switch in your mind that, as you said, when you have good emotions, then you enjoy them, and when you have bad emotions, then you switch into a different state of mind in which you meditate about that all things are perishable, and therefore you shouldn't be perturbed if something bad now happens to you. But I think it's kind of a little bit inconsistent, because you always have to switch these two states of mind, and they are there is a contradiction between the two, because of course you could also meditate while something good is happening to you, that this is completely irrelevant because everything is perishable. And so then you wouldn't be enjoying it, but you would just be indifferent about the good thing as well. And at the same time, I think it's quite difficult to be truly indifferent if something painful is occurring right now. If you feel pain, then yeah, so I think that's where maybe this contradiction might lie. And yes, if you want to say something to that, and or else then we could continue with comparing these two different notions of tranquility, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, so just briefly a question for clarification. So basically, to summarize that point which you made, it could be said that, okay, if when you have bad emotions, you try to shift your mind, the state of your mind, if you try to do that with bad emotions, well, that could happen with good emotions as well, basically.
Yes, yes. Why do you then allow a different and not congruent state of mind when you have good emotions?
Right, exactly. So if it happens with bad emotions, then it might happen with good as well.
Yes, so you should just be indifferent to everything because everything is perishable.
Right, right.
Yes. Okay, so yes, I think that's interesting now, comparing these ideas of tranquility, because that's, of course, at the heart of the Stoic philosophy, and I think it's also an important notion in Christianity, at least as far as I understand it. And perhaps one thought that I just had before, as you were explaining this, is that the Stoic kind of tries to achieve tranquility, but without any help from outside or above, from God or from anything. He tries to achieve tranquility by himself through his own rational faculty, whereas the Christian doesn't try to achieve it in that manner.
Yes, that's correct. It is a message in the gospel that it is Christ only that can give people true peace, and that you have to get it as a gift from him and through the grace of God. While, as you say in Stoicism, it seems rather that it is something you can achieve by your own. I'm not sure if, and perhaps this is something you could answer, whether the Stoics would view this Stoic peace within yourself as a virtue that you can train yourselves to achieve. Would that be something that the Stoics would affirm?
As far as I understand the Stoic philosophy, I think that's something they would say, yes.
Right. Yes. Because then for them it would be a good thing that the person has, according to them, to have this Stoic peace that people can, by their own efforts, accomplish to have, in other words. So yes, there is a difference there between Stoicism and Christianity, and also, as you have said, that Stoicism is connected to this idea that you might be indifferent to things happening around you. That seems to be a very common view about Stoicism, that it's basically suppressing emotion and being indifferent to things in general, because, as we have discussed, according to them, things are perishable and bad things happening to you, but to be indifferent to them is connected to this idea of having this Stoic peace. But in Christianity, indifference would not be the answer. Rather, it would be having a clear love of the divine Lord, God, and it would also be having you could say that the Christian life would involve being interested in things happening around you. For instance, you would object to injustice and immorality. If someone offends God, for instance, that would be something that bothers the the Christian, the Ten Commandments would would be interested in that. They would be interested in their family, what is happening to them, what is going to happen to their souls, etc. So yes, the Christian who has the love of God would not be indifferent to things, but Stoics compared to that would seem to be. Now, I might perhaps have mischaracterized Stoicism if I did so, but that's my impression at least.
You said many things there. I can't just now take them all together, but maybe we can take it apart step by step. So I also somehow have this, I don't think that the Stoics necessarily would advocate to be indifferent, but they would advocate to be unmoved by good or bad things happening around you. That you kind of remain in this inner calmness, that you are not moved. Like they like this metaphor of water that is either smooth or it is very turbulent and much motion going on, and they would say that your inner core should remain very still all the time. So yes, and I was thinking before that if I try to imagine as someone who, we talked about this in our last conversation about God as a useful model of reality, which helps people to act better in life. And I was thinking just now, if you have this model, if you imagine or if you assume that there is a God, somehow a knowledgeable and very potent being who is kind of in control of what happens in the world, and that this being actually wants the good for you. And maybe even if you assume that the good isn't necessarily connected to this world, but this world is only of secondary importance for what is truly good to you, if you truly believe that, then you could find comfort in that, even if you are experiencing bad things at the moment. And this you wouldn't necessarily have to be unmoved by anything that happens, or indifferent is the wrong word, but you could still experience strong emotions, positive or negative, about things that happen in this world, and at the same time yes, you wouldn't have to neglect, for example, truly wanting the good for someone else, and therefore being troubled very much if they move in a bad direction, for example. So you wouldn't have to neglect love as opposed to the Stoics, maybe, which shouldn't be moved by anything.
Right. So in other words, if I have understood you correctly, it could be said that from the Christian religious perspective, you would have this deep concern about the next life and the eternal destination of souls, which would make you at least less concerned about worldly affairs. But still, that you could say that deep concern, which is more directed to the next world than this one, still you have this presence of love, which differ from the Stoics.
Yes, I think you summarized me correctly, but I think I'm still a little bit confused myself about. It seems there are 2 points that I have mixed together a little bit. One is this differentiation between being concerned about this life or about some other life which supposedly comes afterwards. And the other point is about being truly concerned about wanting the good for someone, as opposed to not being moved by what happens to somebody else or to oneself.
Yes, yeah, those are two distinct points that you brought up. Yes, those are deep questions, to put it that way. And on the first point, yes, according to the Christian perspective, everything would be viewed in light of eternity, the next life, which is eternal, and everything would be viewed from that perspective. As we talked about last week, there is this tradition within Catholicism that you can meditate on what is called the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And that's a way to motivate you to obey God's will and think about what really matters and what is at stake, what is really the thing that you should be concerned about, instead of superficial things. So yes, this perspective would be very true and very much affirmed in the Christian gospel. So perhaps it could be said that there is a sense of a little bit of similarity with the Stoics, in the sense that there are worldly affairs and things that are perishable that people should avoid being very concerned about, and rather prioritize the something else. And for the Christians, that something else is the eternal. And for the Stoics, well, that might simply be the Stoic peace or tranquility, which is compared to this water which is laying still, as you talked about. As for the other question, yes, it is indeed the case that for the Christian, because you have these two commandments that Christ gave, that first you love your God with all your heart and your soul, and then the second one, that you love thy neighbor as yourself, which would therefore imply that you are concerned about the well-being of your fellow men. And if something harmful happens to their soul especially, then that bothers you, because in a Christian perspective, there are two types of harm. There is harm to the soul, and there is harm to the body. Because bodily harm, that's, let's say you are being hurt because you fell off a bike and you have to go to the hospital, you get some wounds, that's bodily harm. But the harm of the soul is far more serious, because that is rather a moral problem, that your soul is morally corrupted. And if your soul is spiritually killed through what is called mortal sin, then that's really serious, because that is going to affect where you end up in the next life. So for a Christian, to love your neighbor would involve both a concern for their bodily well-being, but most important of all, the well-being of their soul. So that's the Christian view of that, if that helps answer your questions.
Yes, I think you made some good points there to clarify both the similarity and the difference between Stoicism and Christianity. I think that's was very useful. So the similarity is that both of these ways of life teach you to not put so much emphasis on what happens in this world, in this physical world. So what happens to your body, or what happens even to your children or your property, that these things are not of paramount importance. And so in that sense, both of these philosophies, if I can call them so, will help you deal with living in difficult times. But the difference is with the point that they say where the primary focus should be. And in Stoicism, it's basically just not being perturbed, because being perturbed is irrational, and you should be rational because you are a rational animal, and that's kind of the highest virtue. Whereas in Christianity, it seems to be on achieving the eternal life in heaven instead of in hell. But then, important as a means to doing that, you should love your neighbor, so you should be good to other human beings, because there is this idea that whatever you do to the lowest around you, that's what you do to God. So in effect, the teaching then makes people try as good as they can to be good to their fellow human beings. And in that sense, I think Christianity as a model really leads, if you follow this prescription, then this leads to a very good society where people try to help each other. And I think also it doesn't matter if even the most important focus is still placed on helping someone else, not ruining his soul, if you so want, because still the second most important focus is then placed on helping them also in this physical world. So for example, housing the people who have no house, or giving food to those who have no food, etc.
Right, yes, so it would be said that there is a hierarchy of things that should concern you. That first of all, it is the well-being of the soul, and then later below that there is the well-being of the body, the material comfort. And both things are something that Christians should have in mind, but there is a hierarchy about which is the most important. And yes, as you point out, such a Christian ethics is very good for society, as many people have pointed out. And also it could be said that this love of thy neighbor also shows the societal aspect of human beings, that we are social creatures, and it is natural for us to have a society, and for such a society to function, we need to take care of each other, to put it that way. And also what's very I would say beautiful about Christianity, one of the beautiful things is that society is elevated above the mere worldly society of the current country or local village that we currently reside in, but rather you are elevated to an even higher form of society, which is the fellowship of the saints in heaven, ultimately speaking. And also the love of your neighbor would be a way to help people be part of and participate in this elevated form of society that is transcending the mere worldly society. So that's a very beautiful thing about Christianity that I would point out. So yes, you see this concern about both your own soul and the souls of others, and below that the concern of your material well-being, and also the well-being of other human beings, both bodily and spiritually. So here we see the Christian view, while Stoics would not see it exactly that way, to put it that way.
Yes, I think this is very we are getting really to the bottom of this comparison right now, because just one small thought, I think it makes also sense from a Christian point of view that spreading the, how would you call this, the spiritual salvation or the spiritual message is more important than fixing the bodily harm of people. Because first of all, if you live, now that's again my materialist brain speaking, but if you live in a very difficult time, in a time of troubles, then of course, even if you give someone something to eat, they will still have to deal with all the negative emotion that come from living in such a difficult time, with all the pain and the uncertainty and there is some word that I'm not finding. If you can't see any solution anymore, then you are really desperate, with all the desperation, exactly. So, and the best thing that you can do for someone in these circumstances is to give them a way to deal with these desperations. And then, of course, also if you convince more people to follow your model, which, as we said, is good for society, then it will lead to an actual improvement of society and also of the general state of everyone's life. So this makes sense, even if you don't believe in any of the supernatural claims. And I just thought now that Stoicism also has something kind of as a substitute for what we have now discussed in Christianity, and that's why I think the Stoics always refer to the concept of duty. So you have a duty towards your society, and if you want to be a virtuous person, then you should fulfill your duty. And to me, this never made sense, because they claim always that rationality is the highest thing, so you shouldn't be perturbed, because being perturbed about something which is inevitable is not rational. But then they switch around and keep talking about do your duty, do not run away in battle because you have to do your duty, or if you are the emperor, then you should be a good emperor because that's your duty. But if everything is perishable, then who cares if I'm a good emperor or a bad one? So this idea of duty is somehow, it's not congruent with the other Stoic idea of rationality and tranquility. Whereas in the Christian sense, the idea of love is it's congruent throughout the whole ideology, and also it's more beautiful and I think more moving to do things out of love, which means you truly care for a good outcome, rather than just doing your duty even though everything is meaningless, or just simply not caring because because it's irrational to care. So I think that's also a point where Christianity has the strong upper hand, and therefore probably also gained more allegiance among more people.
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point. And I also reminded of something that the historian Dr. Thomas Woods said when he compared the Christian concept of charity, being charitable and giving to the poor, and comparing that to the Stoics, because he argued that it was the Catholic Church who gave us the concept of charity. And some would point out, well, didn't the Stoics also give some things to the poor? Some might object. And Dr. Woods, he answers by saying that, yes, true, the Stoics had this idea that at least sometimes you should do it, but it was not out of love, it was out of a pure duty, or just to have this sort of very Stoic kind of tranquility or peace, rather than the love of your fellow neighbor. So that's a very huge contrast between the Stoic view and the Christian view. And charity in the, as the Catholic Church presented it, is about giving to the poor out of love. So we see this contrast there, as Dr. Woods pointed out. And yes, I also would comment when it comes to duty and Christianity and love. What is beautiful about Christianity as well is that, yes, very true, you have duties toward God, to worship Him, you have the duty to obey the 10 Commandments, but it's not simply something you have to do. It is also something that will make you happy. If you live the Christian life, which you have the duty to do, but you have the duty, but you will also be happy to do these things. So this is a contrast both to the Stoics as well as Immanuel Kant, the very famous philosopher, about duty, talking about duty simply as some things you have to do, and that's it, rather than being something you do out of love and doing something because you want to do. This is related to what time we talked about virtue, and how doing good things over time and gaining virtues, you will end up liking doing those good things that you are called to do. You'll do it out of pleasure or love. And that is beautiful about Christianity. It's not simply you have to follow these rules, but it will also make you happy. And that's a very good thing to think about.
Yes, yes. I think this is, I'm really happy with this conversation. I think for me, I have now really understood the similarity and the difference between Stoicism and Christianity, and it is as here in this book, Toynbee says that both kind of help you to deal with a world that is falling apart, but the one is really just yes, being tranquil or not taking it in, and the other is really has this essential ingredient of love, of striving towards something good or something positive, something that you really desire, and it's also more logically consistent in that sense, because as we said, if you even do anything, then this requires that you have some desire for this thing that you pursue. And so, of course, if you act out of love, then it makes complete sense, because you desire something and then you act in accordance with that. And yes, so I don't know, do you, I wanted to get to a nice close, but also I think your point about Kant is also very interesting, because I was always troubled by this philosophy, this deontology of no, it's not, was it called like that?
I think it's called deontology.
Yes, yes, that morality is just simply based on a duty. And to me, I haven't read so much Kant, so I'm not very qualified, but it seemed almost ridiculous. Like, well, where does this duty come from? You can't just say that it's a duty and this just kind of falls out of the sky and therefore now everybody has to do it. So yes, and it also seemed very, very heartless. It's just like a Prussian military school. It's your duty, and so you have to do it. But why would I even care to do it if it's just, if there is no real internal intrinsic motivation there? So yes.
Yes, that's very true. Kant's philosophy there is false and harmful, I would also say, and it's connected to his deeper philosophy of a transcendental idealism about the external world and your relationship to it, and all that, where he gets this idea of some duties that simply are out there and you simply have to follow them. And I think Kant's ideas might explain, at least partly, why some people have the misunderstanding that Christians cannot have joy in their lives. They simply have to follow these rules and they have to they cannot enjoy anything. But that's completely false. It's rather the opposite, that true joy comes from living the Christian life. So I think Immanuel Kant is at least partly to blame for this misunderstanding about Christianity.
Yes, I was also just thinking to round off this thought as well, that this idea that as you improve your virtues, as you get more and more habituated to doing the right thing, then you also start to love doing the right thing. That I think this comes from Aristotle, or maybe even earlier, I don't know. But so in that sense, this idea is also maybe in its in a kind of incomplete form. It's already there in the Greek philosophy, and perhaps even in Stoicism too. I'm not quite sure. I think Stoics talk more about duty than they talk about virtue. That's my impression. But the idea was still there. But I think that from what we have discussed now, I would say that Christianity makes a more coherent, complete package, whereas the Stoic philosophy is kind of cobbled together from a couple of pieces who are not necessarily coherent with each other. I think it's for me also it's interesting because I have been fascinated by the Stoic philosophy, and I have seen for myself a lot of value in it in many occasions. But still, sometimes there are also aspects that kind of that I couldn't really understand, that I thought they have just kind of inserted like an axiom in the middle of their theory, and it doesn't really follow from what they said before. Like this thing with the duty is one such example. If everything is perishable, then what's this whole talk about duty? Doesn't make sense. So, and I remembered what I was going to say before, that one of my professors in university, he's the professor of Old Testament, and he said something very interesting, and he said that in his understanding, Christianity is kind of the product that came out when some Jews tried to adapt Judaism so that it's compatible with Greek philosophy. So when the Greeks were militarily successful, and they took the whole Near East and controlled it, then of course the Greek philosophy started, Greek culture started spreading in that area. And then there were the Jews living in this area. This was maybe 100 or 200 or 300 BC, I think. And there was a big conflict in the Jewish community. There were these half of the Jewish community that wanted to go along and incorporate this Greek philosophy, and they kind of started to read the Old Testament very selectively, so that it can somehow be brought together with the Greek philosophy. And then there were the more conservative Jews who said, no, we have to reject this foreign influence, this Greek philosophy, because it goes against central commandments of our religion. And so my professor has this theory that the first of these groups eventually developed into Christianity.
Well, I would of course disagree with him. Yeah, because the basis of Christianity was the life and works of Christ, and that's evident. But it is true that Greek philosophy and certain concepts has influenced the Christian Catholic Church in the centuries to come after Christ. For instance, with the ecumenical councils, where they dogmatically defined the divinity of Christ and the Trinity and incarnation, etc. They used some terms and concepts which could be dated back to Aristotle and perhaps even earlier, such as substance and essence. In the First Council of Nicaea, they, for instance, talk about Christ, the Son of God, being consubstantial with the Father, which means that the Son and the Father share in the same divine substance. And substance is something that dates back to the Greeks. So I would say when it comes to terminology and the way to clarify and explain the gospel, then Greek philosophy has played a role in that, I would say. But the truths of divine revelation itself, the gospel itself, is revealed by God, would I say.
Yes, I mean, I guess this depends, of course, if you take more of a historic view, that you believe that religious texts had a long history of being created, and then or if you take them literally as this has been revealed as it is written here, and then you get a different conclusions from different starting points. But unfortunately, also I'm not competent enough in all of these things to make a very, very strong point, but I thought that this idea of this professor was very interesting, and it seemed very sensible to me as he explained it, but I cannot now pass it on with the same strength and clarity. So
I see.
yes, I think one example that he also said is that Christianity has a big portion of Neoplatonism in it. So, for example, the idea of having an immaterial soul is something that doesn't exist in Judaism, but it's very central to Christianity. And he had more examples which I don't remember.
Well, I would point out that it's very true that there are similarities. That's very true, but that doesn't mean that the one caused the other or that the one influenced the other simply because there are similarities. So, but yes, I could mention that Neoplatonism, which followed after Plato, influenced many of the early church some centuries after the gospel, and some of them even earlier than that. And they try to see what parts of Platonism which is compatible with their own gospel and try to compare it. And it's actually very interesting because some early church fathers thought that Plato had so much correct views that some of them began to argue that Plato began talking about the Trinity, the idea that the supreme good is actually three. So they would say that Plato actually managed to get very far in his quest for truth and eventually discover several aspects of the Christian gospel. So that's a very interesting point that some of the fathers brought forward.
Interesting. Yes, I mean, this is of course true what you said before, that just because two things are similar and occur in a similar time doesn't mean that one caused or influenced the other. This is you can't argue against this. This is then yes, it's at some point it becomes a question of faith. So do you believe in divine revelation, or do you believe in incremental change of texts and ideologies through transmission and through people just thinking about them and trying to continually improve them? So you can't prove one or the other, I would say.
Yes, I would say that many historians unfortunately have these presuppositions that inform their conclusions. Many who are materialists or naturalists thereby automatically choose a secular explanation of all this. But I would say that we can have an objective methodology of history, where we simply look at all the documents and manuscripts and try to think about, okay, what is the most plausible explanation of these things? And given that one is open to the possibility of miracles and divine revelation, then we'll see, okay, how does this explanation or hypothesis fit with the data compared with the other hypotheses? So I would argue that there is a scientific or objective way to deal with it.
I think this would be an interesting topic for a whole conversation in and of itself, because it's a very big question. But I fear even if we talked about it for 2 hours, we wouldn't get very far, because I think in the end it's truly the point where faith comes into the equation. So can you believe that miracles occurred or occur or can occur? Can you, in your understanding of the world, see this possibility? And if you can, then you can view at the data in a certain way. But if you can't, then certain ways of interpreting the data just aren't sensible to you, no matter how much data there is. So yes, I don't know if this can be solved somehow. or in a discussion?
Well, I would say that that even though it's true that the philosophical presupposition can truly influence and affect what one's views of history, I think there are some objective scientific things one can use as well. Like if you have a series of hypotheses, you look at, okay, which one has the best explanatory power, explanatory scope, plausibility, is it ad hoc or not? So there are some objective criteria. And yes, I would be very glad to explore this question further in a conversation one day.
Okay, I will put it on my list, and maybe we can talk about it in some future conversation. Yes, I think it would be worthwhile for sure. It would be interesting. Yes,
that would be great. After all, it is the miracle of the resurrection, which is the very basis of Christianity. So St. Paul says in the Bible that if Christ did not rise from the dead, then all our faith is in vain. So it shows the centrality. So I think it would be a very interesting and important topic to talk about. Yeah.
Wow. Yes, it would be. It's no small topic. That's very true. Just out of curiosity, do you know why St. Paul said this? What was his reasoning behind this statement?
Well, essentially, his idea was that the resurrection of Christ from the dead is the confirmation or proof that he really was who he claimed to be, the divine God in flesh. And if he didn't rise from the dead, then all of Christianity would be a huge hoax, to put it that way. So for him, that was the proof of the gospel. Okay, so it's kind of the miracle that proves that the teaching is correct. So you don't just have to take it on faith, but you actually have a concrete evidence of it. I would put it in the way to say that Christianity is I suppose you could say based on what is called signs, which it could either be miracles or prophecies that are fulfilled. And the apostles argued both from fulfilled prophecies as well as the miracles, like the resurrection. Okay. Okay, interesting. So it is rational to believe in other words. There is an argument to be offered for the truth of Christianity. Which convinced me because, yeah, I used to be an atheist, but I was eventually convinced by that argument. Yes. Okay, we will have that conversation some other day because we need enough time for it. So